I was out in the Sonoran Desert for a solo camping trip in early May. I had picked that time of year because it was just before the serious heat kicked in, and the nights were still bearable. I didn't go to the typical park spots or campgrounds. I preferred more remote areas, places where I could go a day or two without seeing another person, where I could watch the sun rise over distant hills and not hear anything but the wind and maybe the occasional coyote. This time, I had planned to spend 4 days out near a stretch of desert about 50 miles from Tucson, a little-known area with scattered boulders, thick brush, and the occasional cactus forest. I drove my Jeep until the dirt trail became too narrow and washed out, then parked it on the edge of a dry arroyo and hiked a couple miles in, carrying everything on my back: tent, water, food, and a small revolver I always brought for snakes or coyotes, or in case I broke an ankle and needed to fire off a shot for help. I'd never had to use it, but it was part of my checklist. The first night was fine. Quiet, almost too quiet, which always feels strange at first. It takes a while to get used to the absence of cars or electricity or other people. I made a small fire with mesquite branches, cooked a basic meal, and watched the stars. The Milky Way looked like someone had shaken sugar across the sky. The only sound I heard before falling asleep was the occasional scratching of something small in the brush, probably a lizard or a kangaroo rat. The second day I explored around. There was a little rise to the west of my tent, and when I climbed it, I could see the open desert stretching all the way to the pale purple mountains. The air was dry and smelled like dust and sun-scorched plants. Around mid-afternoon, I spotted something weird off to the south. Looked like trash or fabric, flapping lightly in the wind. I figured it was a drop tarp or an old tent left behind by some careless hiker. I made a note to check it out the next day. That night, I woke up a few times. Nothing specific caused it, I just felt unsettled. You learn to listen to your gut out there. I couldn't hear anything out of the ordinary. No footsteps or voices or snapping branches. Just that strange sense of awareness, like my brain was trying to pick up on something my ears couldn't. But I told myself I was just letting the quiet get to me. Happens sometimes. You go too long without human sounds and your imagination steps in to fill the gaps. On the third morning, I headed south to check out the strange shape I'd seen. Took a while to hike that way, picking through cactus and cholla and sharp rocks. The sun was already heating up the ground by mid-morning. I wore jeans and a long-sleeve shirt to avoid sunburn, but I could still feel the heat rising off the desert floor like a stove. When I reached the spot, I realized it wasn't fabric. It was skin. I froze for a second before I could even register what I was seeing. It was a man, completely naked, sunburned red on his shoulders and back, lying face down in the sand. His legs were scraped and covered in tiny cactus spines. His feet were blistered and dirty, cracked and bloody. He wasn't moving. At first I thought he was dead, and my heart dropped. But then I noticed his back rising and falling slightly. He was breathing. Barely. I didn't move him. I didn't know what state he was in. I crouched down nearby and just stared at him for a moment. He had nothing with him. No water, no gear, not even shoes. His back had scratches, some fresh, some older and scabbing over. His arms were tucked underneath him. I called out to him, but he didn't respond or move. I tossed a small rock in his direction, not to hurt him, just to see if he'd react. Nothing. I had a spare water bottle and left it near him, but I wasn't about to drag a full-grown man through miles of rough desert by myself. I marked the spot on my GPS and made the hike back to my camp, packed up fast, and headed for the Jeep. I kept looking over my shoulder the whole way. I couldn't explain why. There was just something wrong about it all. Something beyond just the fact of a naked man nearly unconscious in the desert. It took me several hours to get back to cell service and report it. The sheriff's department said they'd send someone out. I gave them the coordinates and my name and waited around in the gas station parking lot until they said they'd found him. Only they didn't. They went out there that same evening and searched the area, but they didn't find a man or tracks or anything. The water bottle I'd left was gone too. I started second-guessing myself, wondering if I'd gotten the location wrong. But I knew that land. I had the GPS pin. I had walked right back to my Jeep from there with no detours. I hadn't hallucinated it. I wasn't dehydrated. I wasn't sleep-deprived. I saw what I saw. The authorities told me they'd keep checking and let me know if anything turned up. They didn't. That should have been the end of it. But I couldn't stop thinking about it. About how sunburned he was, how scraped up his legs were, about how there was no gear, no tracks leading to him or away from him. Just a man lying in the desert like someone had dropped him there. He wasn't even covered in dust like he'd crawled through the sand. It was like he'd been placed there. A few weeks passed. I didn't go back out camping. Every time I thought about it, I remembered how wrong it had all felt. Then one night, scrolling through some weird hiking forums online, I found a thread that made my stomach turn. It was a thread about strange desert sightings. Most of it was crap, talk about orbs or ghosts or lizard men. But buried deep in one reply was a short comment, almost like a joke. Someone said, "Haha, that would have spooked me though. Naked people hiking in the desert? Sounds like the worst possible idea and leaving yourself open to a lot of dangerous encounters." It wasn't the comment itself that got to me. It was what someone replied below it in one of those unpunctuated, rambling posts people make when they're typing too fast. "Dude, I saw that too near Marana, like real far out, no trail, just walking naked slow like a zombie me, and my brother thought he was high or something, but when we yelled he didn't even turn, just kept walking until he got over the ridge and we left fast, didn't feel right at all. Thought we imagined it, but I swear." Then another person responded to that post, saying they'd seen a naked guy near Saguaro West Park, just standing in the sun, arms limp, not reacting to anything. Another person chimed in, same story, different part of the desert. None of them could explain it. Some guessed drugs, some guessed mental illness, some said heat stroke. But a few things were always the same. No gear, no reaction to noise, sunburned, scratched, and always alone. It was like these people were being dumped out there. No bags, no water, no signs of where they'd come from. Just standing or walking or lying down, completely exposed to the desert. The creepiest one was from a guy who claimed he'd found a group of them. 3 naked people just sitting in a circle, not talking, not moving, not responding. He said he'd left as fast as he could. I didn't want to believe it. It sounded insane, but I knew what I saw, and it matched, down to the burned skin and the total silence. Since then, I've kept digging. I don't tell people about it in real life. You sound like a lunatic if you say, "I found a naked man lying in the desert and then he disappeared." But the posts keep popping up. Always the same story, different spots, same kind of terrain, hard to reach, off trail, not close to anything. I have a theory, and it's not supernatural. I think someone's using the desert to dump people. Not kill them directly, just leave them out there with no chance. Maybe it's a cult or traffickers or something else I don't want to imagine. Maybe they strip them down to erase identity. Maybe it's punishment, or maybe it's a game. What really gets to me is how calm the man I saw looked. Not panicking, not crawling for water, just still, as if he'd accepted it. And I can't stop wondering how long he'd been out there before I found him, and where he went afterward. I haven't camped since. I don't think I ever will again. Not in the desert, not anywhere that quiet. Because now, even in the safety of my apartment, I sometimes close my eyes and see that man's back, red and blistered, motionless under the sun, and wonder how many others are still out there, waiting to be found. Or not. And what really scares me, maybe they're not trying to be found. Maybe they don't want to be. Maybe someone took everything away from them, even the part that wants to live. Maybe they're out there because that's exactly where they're meant to be. And maybe next time, someone won't just find one. Maybe they'll find a dozen, just standing, waiting. I had never been to the Chiricahua Mountains before. I knew they were out in the southeastern corner of Arizona, somewhere close to the New Mexico border, but that was about it. When my boyfriend suggested we join a few of his old buddies from high school for a weekend camping trip out there, I agreed, but not because I was excited about the location. We had only been seeing each other for about 2 months at that point, and I was still trying to make a good impression. Say yes to the trip, be social, don't look like a killjoy. That kind of thing. There was one more thing worth mentioning. I had just quit smoking. So had he. We were less than a week into it. That meant I was stressed, twitchy, and more irritable than I normally would have been about something like this. I tried to play it cool while we packed up the car. but my hands were already trembling and my chest felt like it was being slowly squeezed by something. The open road helped for a little while. I focused on the lines, on the hills, on the dry brush flashing past us. But somewhere after we turned off the highway and onto the narrow mountain road, I lost my grip. I cried for a while in the passenger seat, trying to hide my face even though he kept one hand on my thigh to comfort me. I think he felt bad. He didn't say anything about it, which was good. I wasn't in the mood for encouragement or sympathy. I just wanted a cigarette and some quiet. The air was dry and hot, though there was some wind moving through the high desert trees. Junipers mostly, and some oaks. The last few miles of the road were unpaved and full of washboards and deep potholes. We were bouncing all over the place, and I was already getting a headache from the sun. Just as we were nearing the top of a slow rise, the car thudded hard, like we'd bottomed out, and then the engine shut off completely. No lights, no beeping, just the wind and the creak of the frame settling. We just sat there, stunned. He turned the key. Nothing, not even a click. He popped the hood and got out. I sat there in the silence, watching him through the windshield, rubbing my temples. After a few minutes, I got out too. He dug out the manual from the glove box and we both stood over the open engine compartment, pretending to understand what we were looking at. That was when people started stopping. The first was a guy in a red Tacoma, then a couple in a dusty old Outback, then a young woman in an ancient Ford Ranger. Each time, the same thing. They'd roll down a window and ask if we needed help. But I wasn't in the mood for kindness or explanations anymore. I'd lean down and ask, flatly, if they had a cigarette. None of them did. One of them chuckled like he thought I was joking. When they didn't, I'd wave them off, sometimes without even a thank you. Eventually, we found the issue buried in the pages of the manual. It was some kind of automatic shutoff system that kicks in after a major jolt. A safety mechanism for the fuel pump, I think. There was a reset button somewhere under the carpet in the back. Once we pressed it, the car roared back to life. By the time we made it to the campsite, I was completely drained. Emotionally, physically, and mentally. I helped him unload the gear and set up the tent, but I didn't want to talk to anyone. His friends were all joking around, beers in hand, already starting up the fire. I didn't have it in me. I told him I was going to rest. He said something I didn't catch as he wandered off with them, talking and laughing while I ducked into the tent. Inside, it was warm and quiet. I unrolled my sleeping bag, stripped down to my tank top, and curled up against my pack. The air was a little cooler in the shade. I could hear the occasional voice outside, fading as the group wandered off toward the trail for a hike. I closed my eyes and tried to let go of the tight feeling in my chest. I must have dozed off because when I woke up, the light had shifted. The sun was lower, casting long shadows on the tent walls. The breeze had picked up a little. It was probably around 4 in the afternoon. The air was still and silent except for the occasional creak of branches and the flap of the tent walls moving. Then I heard a sound. It was a kind of slow shuffle, leaves and twigs crunching under heavy steps. Something was moving outside the tent. Something big. At first, I thought it might be someone from our group returning. But there were no voices, no sounds of bags or chairs or zippers. Just this slow, heavy, deliberate pacing. The tent wall closest to me suddenly darkened as a large shadow passed by. My breath caught in my throat. I thought bear. It made sense. We were in bear country. There had been warnings about sightings in the area, signs posted at the trailhead. We hadn't brought bear spray, which was stupid. I suddenly realized just how vulnerable I was. Lying there alone in a thin nylon shell, unarmed, groggy, and half-blind without my glasses, which I had left on top of my pack outside the tent flap. The shadow shifted again. I could see it clearly through the thin fabric now. Something tall and wide, thick body, a head, shoulders, turned a little and I could see its side. Then something else, a tail. It swung back and forth, swatting at flies. Wait, I froze. Bears don't have tails. Not like that. Not long, swinging tails. For a second, I didn't move. I was afraid to even breathe. Then I reached slowly for the zipper of the tent. My hand shook. I inched it down a little and peeked out. It wasn't a bear. It was a cow, a huge, light brown cow, standing just a few feet away from the tent, staring off into the woods like it didn't have a care in the world. Its hide was dust-covered, and there were big flies crawling all over its shoulders and face. Its eyes were dull and bored. Another cow was standing a little farther away, chewing on something. They had both wandered into our camp without making much noise. The relief hit me so fast I actually laughed. I laughed until my throat hurt, lying there in the tent like a maniac, laughing at a cow. I felt lightheaded, stupid, exhausted. I finally crawled out, grabbed my glasses, and took a better look. There were 3 of them now, just grazing, walking through the pines, completely uninterested in anything around them. I had forgotten this part of Arizona had open-range cattle. I'd known it vaguely from something I'd read, but it hadn't really registered. I stood there for a while in my socks, watching them slowly drift down the slope and disappear behind the trees. When the others came back from their hike, they saw the hoof prints in the soft ground near the tent. I didn't explain what happened. I didn't need to. I just sat by the fire, feeling calm for the first time in hours. The nicotine cravings were still there, but they were duller now, like the edge had worn off them. The rest of the weekend was uneventful. We cooked, hiked, told stories around the fire. I kept half an eye out for more cows, but I didn't see any. The tension from earlier never quite returned. I think that moment in the tent, when I was convinced a bear was about to tear through the thin nylon wall, reset something inside me. My fear had reached its peak and passed without anything happening. No bear, no death, just a dusty cow with a swinging tail. We left on Sunday afternoon. The car started fine. No more potholes, no more safety switches. As we drove down the winding dirt road, I looked back once through the rearview mirror. Just trees, rocks, and a narrow line of dust rising behind us. That trip stuck with me more than I expected. Not because of the stress or the car trouble or even the cow itself, but because of how easy it was to go from a regular day to being totally convinced that something was about to go horribly wrong. And how easy it is to be wrong. Out there in the desert mountains, when you're tired and hungry and strung out from quitting a habit like smoking, your brain stops being your friend. It fills in the blanks with the worst thing it can imagine. It sees danger in shadows and threats in silence. You tell yourself you're being rational, but you're not. You're guessing, you're panicking, and most of the time, it turns out that shadow outside your tent isn't a bear at all. It's just a cow. I've always been more comfortable outdoors than in cities. Crowds make me nervous, traffic makes me tense, and noise drains me. Being alone in the woods is the opposite. I've always found it peaceful to be by myself surrounded by trees, with nothing but a small fire and the sound of wind in the leaves. I don't get scared of animals out there, not even bears. I've run into plenty of them while backpacking. Most of the time, they want nothing to do with people. Same with mountain lions. You make noise, they leave. I always figured if something bad ever happened on a trip, it'd probably be weather-related, or maybe I'd twist an ankle or get lost. But that's not what happened. This story took place in the Gila National Forest in New Mexico a few years ago. It was late fall, just as the trees were changing and the nights were starting to get really cold. I'd driven down from northern Arizona, looking to spend a few nights by myself before winter fully settled in. I had about a week off from work and wanted to use it to reset. I planned the trip for months, picked a spot deep in the forest, maybe 10 miles from the nearest trailhead, and packed light to keep the hike manageable. Nothing too fancy, just me, my tent, my gear, and the quiet. The area I chose was well off the main routes, not even a popular trail. I had found it by looking at old maps, searching for spots that didn't get much foot traffic. There was a little creek that ran through a narrow canyon, and a few old campsites marked on topographic layers. I wanted quiet, and I got it. When I parked my truck at the end of the dirt road and locked it up, I didn't see another car in the area. Not one. It was already getting late, so I hiked the first few miles as the sun dropped lower in the sky. The temperature fell fast. I had to stop to pull on my fleece and gloves. The cold was sharper than I expected, but I liked it. By the time I reached the canyon, the light was just about gone. I set up my tent near the creek on a flat patch of pine needles beneath some tall old trees. I gathered wood fast, built a small fire, boiled water, and ate a quick meal. Then I sat in the dark and listened. There were some coyotes in the distance, their yips bouncing through the canyons. Something small moved through the brush nearby, a rabbit or maybe a skunk. Normal sounds, familiar. Eventually, I turned in. I crawled into my sleeping bag, zipped everything up tight, and drifted off with the fire crackling outside and the air getting colder by the minute. The next day was uneventful. I woke up with frost on the inside of my tent. My fingers were stiff, but I didn't mind. I made coffee, sat by the creek, and watched the sun slowly rise above the trees. I spent most of the day hiking up one of the ridgelines above the canyon, checking out the views. I didn't see another person. No footprints, no old campfires, nothing, just empty forest. I cooked dinner early that night and was asleep before the stars were fully out. The second night was when things changed. I woke up around 2 a.m. I wasn't sure why at first. The fire had burned out. The tent was dark and freezing. My breath made little clouds as I sat up in my sleeping bag. I stayed still for a moment, waiting to hear something. And then I did. Footsteps, not animal sounds, not paws on leaves or a squirrel darting. Actual footsteps, slow, deliberate ones. Crunch, pause, crunch, pause. They were close. I held my breath and leaned toward the tent wall. The steps moved past one side, maybe 10 or 15 feet away. Too heavy for a deer, too slow for a bear. I didn't hear sniffing or grunting, just steps, careful, steady steps. Someone, or something, was walking around my campsite. I didn't move. I didn't even breathe for a while. I just sat there, listening. Eventually, the sound faded. The footsteps moved back toward the trees, slowly blending with the wind and creaking branches. I waited another 10 minutes before unzipping my sleeping bag and peeking out of the tent. Nothing. The fire pit was cold. My gear was untouched. The trees swayed in the breeze, and the moon cast long shadows across the clearing. No sign of anything out of place. No glowing eyes. No thornbacks. Just the woods and the cold. I told myself it could have been a deer, maybe an elk, but I didn't believe it. Not really. I stayed awake for hours listening. The next day, I almost packed up and left, but I didn't. I told myself it was nothing, just my brain playing tricks, just nerves from being alone too long. So I stayed. That afternoon I hiked again, keeping closer to camp this time. I gathered more firewood than usual and stacked it near the tent. When I came back, I noticed something strange. There were prints in the pine needles. Not shoe prints exactly, more like scuffs, like someone had been dragging their feet, slowly circling my tent. There were no tread patterns, nothing clear, but the indentations were there. I crouched and looked close. The pine needles had been disturbed in a way that wasn't natural. It looked like someone had shuffled slowly around the tent at least twice. My stomach sank. I rebuilt the fire, boiled water for food, and sat there with my back to a tree all evening, staring into the woods. I didn't sleep much that night. I kept the fire going longer than usual and stayed zipped up with my knife next to my sleeping bag. I didn't hear anything. No footsteps, no voices, just wind and coyotes. But I felt something, like I was being watched. I left the tent twice to look around. Nothing, just trees and silence. I pissed into the brush with a flashlight in my other hand, heart pounding the whole time. By sunrise, I was exhausted. I made coffee and stared at the fire, trying to decide what to do. The fear in my stomach hadn't gone away. I knew something was wrong, even if I couldn't prove it. That's when I noticed it. A small piece of twine was tied to the tree about 20 feet from my tent. Bright green. It hadn't been there before. I would have seen it. It was at chest height, wrapped tightly around the trunk in a neat little loop, like someone had been marking the spot. I got up and walked over, touched it. It was synthetic, like the kind you buy at gas stations. New, not weathered. Someone had put it there. Recently, I packed everything immediately. No breakfast, no second guessing. I tore down the tent, stuffed everything into my pack, and put out the fire with creek water. I checked around the site once more and found another piece of twine tied to a low branch near where I'd pissed the night before. I didn't wait. I hiked out fast, pushing hard despite the weight of my gear. I took a different route than I'd used on the way in, avoiding the narrow sections near the canyon walls. I stopped only once for water. The rest of the time I kept moving, glancing back every few minutes. I never saw anyone. When I finally reached the truck, I checked the windows. No damage. The tires were fine. Everything looked untouched. I threw my gear in the back, got in, and drove until I hit pavement. Only once I was on the highway did I let myself relax. I never reported it. There wasn't anything concrete to report. No face, no name, no actual proof. But I know what I heard. I know what I saw. Some random guy had been walking around my tent in the dark, watching me sleep, marking trees, leaving signs. It wasn't an animal. It wasn't some harmless hunter passing through. He never said a word, never made a sound, just circled in silence and left behind enough to let me know I wasn't alone. And the truth is, that scared me more than any mountain lion or black bear ever could. Animals don't stalk you like that. They don't tie strings to trees. They don't come back multiple nights in a row. They don't move silently through campsites and wait in the dark. But people do. Since then, I still go camping. I still go alone. But I don't pick spots that far out anymore. I bring pepper spray and a whistle. I sleep light and set small alarms using tripwire or noisy cans near the tent lines. I don't care if it seems paranoid. I'd rather scare off a raccoon than get surprised by something worse. That trip changed how I see the woods. It reminded me that the most dangerous thing out there isn't a bear or a snake or a storm. It's a man with nothing to lose and enough silence to hide in. I don't think people really understand just how dark the woods can get. I'm not talking about the edges of some campground or a walk through the state park with your phone flashlight on. I mean real darkness. Thick, black, no civilization for miles kind of darkness. The kind that swallows sound and hides shapes that might be just trees or might be something else. Once you're in that kind of night, you realize how loud you really are, how much you rely on light to feel safe, and how easy it is to become invisible if you want to be. That trip taught me a lot, more than I expected. It started out simple, just a weekend hike with my younger brother in the northern part of the state. We'd been doing stuff like that for years. Nothing extreme, just out and back hikes, a couple nights in the woods, and then back home. It was our way of catching up and disconnecting from everything else. This time, we picked a long loop in the mountains. It had a river that wound through the valleys and climbed up into thick pine before leveling out on a ridge. We planned it out so we'd hike in the first day, spend a night halfway, then finish the loop and hike back to the car late the second evening. We didn't want to rush it, and we figured that walking in the dark with our night vision would be a fun challenge. We left the car in the gravel lot by the ranger sign-in and hit the trail in the late morning. The first few miles were steady and uneventful. Just dirt paths, pine needles, and the usual chipmunks darting across the trail. We crossed a small bridge over the river and hiked a few more miles up into the forest. There was nobody else out there, not a single person. It wasn't surprising. It was off-season, and most people don't want to hike when the nights get cold and the sun disappears early. By late afternoon, we were making camp on a ridge not far from a bend in the river. We had a good view through the trees and a flat spot for the tent. The wind started to pick up, and the temperature dropped quick. We made a fire, boiled water for dinner, and ate in the last of the light. No cell service, no sound but the trees creaking and the wind. It was perfect. After the sun dipped completely, we doused the fire and just sat in the dark for a while. My brother was nervous about it at first. He wanted to use his headlamp, but I told him to let his eyes adjust. After 15 minutes, the woods weren't so black anymore. The trees stood out in pale gray shapes. The trail looked like a faint stripe of silver through the brush. The stars above were bright enough to see our own shadows. We stayed up talking for a bit, then crashed out. The ground was cold, but we were used to it. Nothing strange happened that night. No animals, no weird noises, just peaceful quiet. The next day, we packed up and started the long hike back. The loop was over 12 miles, and we figured we'd take it slow and finish the last few miles in the dark. It was part of the plan, to test our natural night vision and hike by starlight and moonlight alone. We'd done it before in shorter bursts, but this would be our longest time doing it without using any lights at all. No flashlights, no headlamps, just our eyes. By the time the sun went down, we still had about 3 miles to go. That part of the trail was a long descent that wound down toward the main road, cutting through patches of open field and thick trees. The moon was bright that night, a little hazy from clouds, but strong enough to light the trail if you gave your eyes time to adjust. After about 15 minutes in the dark, we could see surprisingly well. Every branch, every rock, every dip in the trail was clear enough. We moved slowly, stepping carefully, using our memory of the trail and the patterns of the trees as guides. That's when we saw them. Ahead of us, maybe 50 or 60 feet away, a warm yellow light flickered. Someone was walking down the trail with a lantern. It bobbed a little as they moved, slow and steady, like they weren't in a rush. As we got closer, we made out 2 figures. A couple. They were walking side by side, the girl holding the lantern out in front of her. They were talking, but we couldn't hear what they were saying. The light from the lantern made their faces hard to see. All we could really see was the light and the outlines of their bodies. We kept walking, staying quiet, not wanting to startle them. We were within maybe 30 or 40 feet when I raised my hand and waved. They didn't react. We kept walking, closing the distance. My brother waved too. Still no reaction. They just kept walking like they didn't even see us. We were maybe 10 feet away now. I could see the shine of the lantern on the girl's hand. Then suddenly the girl screamed, loud and sharp, like she'd just been grabbed by something. She jumped backward, the lantern swinging wildly. The guy stumbled too, reaching toward her like she was about to fall. We froze. They finally saw us. The guy turned and looked right at me, eyes wide. The girl looked panicked, like she thought we'd come out of nowhere. My brother and I just stood there, blinking, unsure what the hell just happened. The couple didn't say anything at first. They just stood still, breathing hard, staring at us like we were ghosts. Eventually, they calmed down and walked past us without another word. We kept moving too, but the whole thing left me rattled. The way they didn't see us until we were 10 feet away, how close we got without meaning to. We'd been walking slow and quiet, letting our night vision do the work. And to them, we were practically invisible. We laughed about it at first. It was a weird situation, but kind of funny. The girl must have thought we were some kind of forest creeps sneaking up on them in the dark. But as we kept walking, I started thinking more seriously about it. That moment stuck with me, the fear on her face, the fact that 2 normal guys walking silently without lights could come that close to someone without being noticed. It made me realize something important. When you give up light, you give up being seen. You blend into the woods completely, and that means someone else could do the same. That thought started to eat at me as we got closer to the road. I started looking over my shoulder more often, not because I thought the couple would come back, but because I kept wondering how many others had done what we just did, moved in total silence, hidden by the dark. It made me realize we weren't just 2 hikers testing our night vision. We were, in that moment, the scariest thing on the trail. It wasn't some wild animal that made her scream. It wasn't a sound or a branch snapping. It was us, just 2 people walking quietly in the dark. 2 shapes that hadn't been there a moment ago, suddenly close enough to touch. We reached the road a little after 10 p.m. The trail emptied out onto a long gravel shoulder by the woods. Our car was parked a few hundred feet away. The lot was empty except for 1 other car. The couple's, probably. We walked up to the vehicle, started tossing our gear in the trunk. That's when I looked across the road, toward the tree line. There was something standing just inside the trees. Not an animal, not a shadow, person. They weren't holding a light. They weren't moving, just standing there, still as stone. Watching. I didn't say anything. I just stared. My brother hadn't seen them yet. He was busy pulling off his boots. The figure didn't move, didn't step forward, didn't wave, just stood there, half hidden behind the trees, their shape barely lit by the moonlight. I waited, Still nothing. I closed the trunk slowly, looked down, then back up. Gone. Just trees again. Just branches and darkness. I didn't imagine it. I know what I saw, but I didn't chase it. I didn't say anything to my brother. There was no reason to stir up fear without proof. And besides, maybe it was nothing. Maybe it was just a trick of the light. Maybe. But as we pulled away from the lot and drove back toward the highway, I kept thinking about it. How easy it had been to scare that couple. How invisible we had been. How far a person could get in the woods at night without ever being seen. And the worst part? If that figure I saw had been like us, if they were using night vision, walking in silence, no flashlight, they could have been 20 feet away the whole time and we never would have known. Since that night, I think about that moment every time I go camping. Every time I hike after sunset, I think about how easy it is to become the scariest thing in the forest, and how much easier it is for someone else to do the same, only you never see them coming. Now, when I hike at night, I still don't use a flashlight. I like the way it feels. I like seeing without being seen. But I move slower now. I stay more alert, because I know better than to think I'm the only one out there doing it. The truth is, the woods are full of shadows, and some of those shadows are people. We went camping deep in the state forest, farther than we usually did. It wasn't a national park or some managed trail system with maps and camp hosts. It was the kind of place with fire rings made from old rusted cans and paths that disappeared halfway through the woods. The kind of place where trees grow thick and nobody walks by your tent in the middle of the night unless they really mean to be there. There were 5 of us. Me, 2 of my oldest friends, and 2 others who were kind of on the edge of our group. People who got invited last minute. We were all in our 20s, still in that stage of life where sleeping on the ground with bugs and dirt felt like freedom. The kind of weekend where you pack light, drink too much, and laugh like nothing bad ever happens in the woods. The plan was simple. Hike out 5 miles to a river bend, set up camp, spend 2 nights, then hike back out the 3rd day. No cell service, no trail markers after the first hour, and not a single other person in sight. That's what we wanted. That's what we always said made the trip worth it. Being out where nobody could bother us. We reached the bend by late afternoon on the first day. The site was nearly perfect. A wide, flat spot above the waterline, surrounded by thick pine on 3 sides and a sloped trail leading down to the river. We set up 3 tents in a sort of horseshoe pattern facing the fire pit. 1 tent for me and my buddy Tyler. 1 for our friend Chris. 1 for the other 2 guys, Marcus and Jay, who hadn't camped much before but were eager to be included. We made a fire, cooked a lazy dinner, and watched the sun drop behind the tree line. The sounds of the forest came out like they always do. Crickets, frogs, branches creaking just enough to make you turn your head every now and then. It was cold, not freezing, but enough to make the fire feel necessary. We sat up late drinking and telling stories. At some point, we turned off the lantern and just let the flames light the area. Everything outside that circle of firelight felt black and unknowable. It was easy to imagine all kinds of things living just outside that glow, just beyond where your eyes could focus. But nothing happened that night. No animals, no weird noises, no issues. When we finally put the fire out, the only thing on my mind was how long the hike had been. I crawled into the tent next to Tyler, zipped the door shut, and passed out fast. Sometime in the night, I woke up to a sound that I didn't recognize at first. It was soft, muffled, like a shuffle or a slow brushing of something against nylon. It was right next to my head. I held my breath and listened, sniffing, not a loud snort or snuffle like a bear or a raccoon, just a slow, drawn-out sniff, like someone taking in the smell of the tent itself. Then silence. I waited. Another sniff, closer this time. Then a pause. Then a sound like fingers brushing against the tent wall. I stayed still, eyes wide open, heart starting to thump. I was used to animals poking around at night. Raccoons looking for scraps, deer walking through the brush. But something about this felt different, too slow, too careful. Whatever it was didn't rustle around or knock anything over. It wasn't rooting through trash. It wasn't chewing or snorting. It was just sniffing, deliberately, right along the bottom seam of the tent. and then it was gone. No scampering, no heavy footfalls, just silence. I told myself it was probably a fox or a raccoon, maybe even a deer sticking its nose where it didn't belong. But still, I didn't fall back asleep right away. I stared at the ceiling of the tent for a long time. Eventually, I drifted off. The next morning, nobody mentioned hearing anything. I asked casually while we boiled water for coffee, but everyone shrugged it off. Tyler said he didn't hear a thing. Jay and Marcus joked about bears, but nobody took it seriously. I let it go. That second day, we stuck close to camp, walked the riverbank, gathered more firewood. We talked about going further upriver, but something kept me near the site. I didn't want to say it out loud, but I didn't like the idea of leaving everything unattended. That night, the air felt heavier. Clouds rolled in and blocked out the moon. The woods were darker than before, thicker. We kept the fire going longer than usual, almost like none of us wanted to be the first to crawl into our tents. But eventually, the chill got to us. I went to bed just after midnight. Tyler was already snoring. And again, in the dead of night, I heard it, sniffing. This time, it started near the foot of the tent and moved slowly up the side. It was the same pattern. A long, slow sniff, then silence, then another sniff closer. No movement, no rustling leaves, just the sound of someone, or something, drawing in air right next to the thin nylon wall. I didn't move. I didn't make a sound. This wasn't an animal. I knew that now. It was too precise, too slow. I stared into the dark and felt my skin start to crawl. Then I heard it again outside the other tent. A second sniffer. Same slow pattern. One near me, one near Chris, and still not a sound from the others. I waited, barely breathing, until it stopped. The next morning, I walked the site, looked for tracks, anything, but the ground was too hard, the pine needles too thick. No footprints, no signs of animals. Nothing moved. The others didn't hear anything. Nobody saw anything, but something had been there. That afternoon, I finally told Chris what I'd been hearing. He didn't laugh, didn't call me paranoid. He just listened and nodded slowly. We made a plan, just to ease my mind. That night, after everyone went to bed, Chris stayed up in his tent with a small mirror from his camping kit. The back of his tent faced the woods, and he unzipped it just enough to poke the mirror out so he could see behind him. I did the same in mine. I lay there in the dark, staring at that little strip of night outside the zipper, waiting. It was around 3 a.m. when I saw movement. A shape crouching low, moving slow, no flashlight, no gear, just a person, all in dark clothes, creeping between the tents like they were checking something. I held my breath and watched them lean toward Chris's tent, sniffing. Then another shape joined them, smaller, also dressed in black. They crouched near the corner of the tent. One reached out a hand, bare fingers, tracing the seam of the door like they were looking for something. I almost yelled, but then I saw Chris's mirror flash in the dark. The shapes froze. Chris moved fast, too fast for them to react. He burst out of his tent holding the metal fire poker from the pit, swinging it in a wide arc. I jumped out too, boots already on, flashlight in hand. The two figures bolted. No shouting, no confrontation, they just ran. Straight into the woods. Gone in seconds. Chris and I didn't chase them. We just stood there, hearts racing, waiting to see if they'd come back. They didn't. The next morning, we packed up fast. No breakfast, no fire. We hiked out in silence. On the way out, Chris found something caught on a branch near the edge of the trail. A torn piece of black fabric, like from a hoodie or a mask. Just a scrap, but it told us enough. These weren't lost hikers. They weren't campers. They weren't looking for help. They were watching us, sniffing tents in the night like they were testing how close they could get. Probably looking for keys, wallets, maybe worse. And they nearly got away with it. If Chris hadn't stayed up, they might have gotten into one of our tents. Might have waited for the right moment. Might have taken something or someone. Now, every time I camp, I remember that sound. Not footsteps, not growls, just the slow, steady sound of a person sniffing, inches from your face. on the other side of thin fabric. Not because they wanted food, but because they wanted to know what was inside, and they were almost brave enough to find out. I was camping with my family deep in the Sierra Nevada mountains. We had picked a spot off a rough dirt road near a river. It wasn't an official campground, just a clearing with enough space for 2 tents, a fire ring made of rocks, and a spot to park the SUV. My wife and kids were excited about it. They liked being off-grid, no cell service, no distractions. We spent the day fishing, skipping rocks in the river, and cooking over the fire. When the sun went down, the cold came with it. We layered up and sat around the fire, roasting marshmallows and passing a bottle of cheap whiskey between us. My kids, still young, got tired fast and crawled into their sleeping bags before it was even fully dark. My wife followed soon after. I told her I'd stay out a bit longer with the dog, just to enjoy the fire and the quiet. The dog, Benny, a big mutt we'd adopted from a shelter, was lying at my feet, watching the flames. I cracked open another beer and leaned back in the camp chair. The fire popped and hissed. The sound of the river was faint but steady behind me. The woods, thick with pines and oaks, loomed in black shapes beyond the firelight. Every now and then, I heard a rustle or twig snap, but I didn't think much of it. Forests talk at night. It must have been around 10 or so when Benny sat up straight, ears up, muscles tight. I looked at him, confused. His nose was working the air, and he gave off a low growl, deep and serious. This wasn't a chipmunk or some skunk he caught a whiff of. This was something bigger. I slowly put my beer down and grabbed the flashlight off the table. I hadn't lit the lantern. The only light was from the fire. Benny's growl deepened, his head locked toward the slope behind our campsite, the area where the trees opened up into a rocky patch with scrub brush and logs. I turned on the flashlight and scanned the dark. At first, I didn't see anything, just trees, brush, rocks. Benny stepped forward and gave a short, sharp bark. Then I saw it. I shined low to the ground, but wide apart. The light caught 2 yellow eyes looking right at me. I froze. The animal didn't move. The shape was low but long, with a thick tail stretched behind it. It wasn't a coyote. It wasn't a dog. It was a mountain lion, about 100 yards out, just sitting there watching. Something changed in my brain in that moment. It wasn't fear exactly. It was more like a total shift in awareness. The kind that hits when you realize something wild is paying attention to you. I knew mountain lions were in these woods, sure, but knowing that and seeing one watching you from the dark are 2 different things. I kept the flashlight trained on it. I didn't yell or move much. I didn't want to startle it into running or charging. Benny stood right next to me now, growling steadily, tail stiff and straight. The lion didn't move. It just crouched there, like a ghost made of muscle. I could feel how quiet everything else had gotten. Even the fire seemed to dim. The usual forest sounds had gone dead silent. No wind, no bugs, no frogs from the river. Just this tension like the air was holding its breath. I stood like that for I don't know how long. Maybe a minute, maybe 5. Then the lion stood. It didn't run. It just turned, slow and quiet, and walked back into the trees, like it had decided I wasn't worth the effort. I stood there with the flashlight still pointed into the trees long after it was gone. Benny was still tense, still growling under his breath. I didn't want to go back into the tent. I didn't even want to move. Eventually, I poked the fire a bit and made it bigger just to feel better. I didn't drink any more beer. I just sat with the dog until almost 2 a.m., listening, scanning the dark, thinking about that lion. It wasn't just the fact that it was there. It was how silent it had been, how close it had probably gotten before Benny noticed it. That was the part that stuck with me. Mountain lions don't announce themselves. They're like ghosts in the real world. Made of flesh, sure, but acting like smoke. I started wondering how many times I'd camped in places like this and had no idea one was nearby. The next morning, I didn't say anything to the kids about it. I didn't want to scare them, but I talked to my wife and pointed out where the lion had been. We walked over there together. We didn't see prints right away, but when we looked closely at a patch of dirt and pine needles, we found one. A clean paw print, almost as big as my hand, fresh from the night before. She stared at it, then looked back at the tent. Her face changed. I could tell she was thinking what I had thought all night. We'd been lucky. We packed up later that day and drove home. And on the way back, I just kept thinking about how I had sat by so many fires over the years, relaxing with a drink, and never once thinking about what might be just beyond the edge of the light. That night burned into me. It changed the way I feel about camping. Not in a bad way, but in a respectful way. I still camp, still hike, still sleep in a tent. But now I pay closer attention to the signs, the smells, the silence. I never let the dog off leash. I keep the flashlight closer, because the truth is, the wild doesn't care about us. It doesn't mean us harm, but it doesn't care either. And if I hadn't had the dog with me that night, I might never have known the lion was there. I would have gone to bed with it crouched in the trees, maybe just watching. Maybe more. That thought still gives me chills. Started out as a joke. One of those dumb things that people say around a fire after too many beers. We were 4 of us camping just outside Flagstaff, Arizona. Late September. The nights were already dipping into the 40s, but the days were warm and dry, perfect for hiking, sitting by the lake, or just wasting hours throwing a ball for the dog and listening to the forest around us. We were in a flat stretch near a hill that dropped down into a canyon. Pines everywhere. The campsite wasn't official, just one of those flat clearings off a dirt road that looked like it had been used 100 times before. We had all been friends for years. Me, Andy, Travis, and Susan. Susan had brought her golden retriever, Lenny, who was about the friendliest, fluffiest animal on the planet. He'd chase a tennis ball for hours. He'd bring it back every time, sit down with his tail thumping, and drop it at your feet with this dopey look like, "Come on, throw it again." It became a kind of ritual that weekend. Wake up, make coffee, throw the ball. Go for a hike, come back, throw the ball. Sit by the fire drinking beer until late. Keep throwing the ball until Lenny was too tired to move. That dog never seemed to get enough. That night, the last night we were out there, we were drinking more than usual. We had stayed close to camp all day, hiked a little up the canyon edge, then spent the evening grilling and talking. Susan had picked up some new kind of spike seltzer that we all made fun of. But by the end of the night, we were cracking open can after can and joking around the fire. Lenny was still at it even past 11. You'd think he'd finally crash, but no. He'd trot over with the ball, drop it, and bark once. Just once. Enough to let you know he was serious. I was more drunk than I had planned to get. I had reached that stage where everything felt loose and heavy, where your thoughts take longer to line up and your body feels both too fast and too slow. At some point, Travis and Andy called it a night. They were sharing a tent. Susan was in her own. I was sitting on a log, still tossing the ball for Lenny, who disappeared into the dark and came back every time. "Throw that damn ball already, Susan," I slurred out loud to nobody in particular. And no tricks this time. I laughed to myself. Lenny dropped the ball again. I picked it up and threw it into the shadows at the edge of the woods. It landed with a dull thump somewhere past the ring of firelight. He vanished after it. He didn't come back right away. I stood up, stumbling a little, and grabbed a flashlight from the table. I aimed the beam toward the spot where I had thrown the ball. The pine trees soaked up the light. Their shapes looked like they were leaning in. The flashlight wasn't that bright, and with the smoke from the fire drifting across the beam, I couldn't see much past 30 feet. I whistled, waited. Nothing. I called out, still slurring a bit but louder now, "Lenny!" Still nothing. I turned off the flashlight for a second and let my eyes adjust. You could see more that way sometimes. That was when I saw the movement, just a small shift in the shadows, low to the ground. I turned the light back on and aimed it. There he was, Lenny, sitting still, looking at me, but he wasn't acting like usual. He wasn't trotting over. He wasn't wagging his tail. His head was down and I could barely see the shape of the ball at his feet. I walked a few steps closer. He still didn't move. I figured he was just tired, or maybe spooked by something. I knelt and called again, quieter this time. "Come on, boy. He still didn't move. That's when I noticed the sound. Something light, quick, like shuffling, coming from behind me. I turned around fast and scanned the woods with the flashlight. I didn't see anything at first, but then, at the far edge of the campsite, where our cars were parked off the dirt road, I thought I saw someone step behind a tree. Just a quick glimpse of motion. A shape, human, standing, moving with intent. I froze. That kind of fear that grabs your spine. The beer left my head all at once, like sobering up in a split second. I stood up, pointing the light toward where I'd seen the shape. Lenny had come up behind me now, but still wasn't acting normal. He pressed against my leg, low and quiet. No bark, just a low growl building up in his chest. I backed up slowly, keeping the light moving. The fire behind me cast shadows across the trees and made it hard to tell what was moving and what wasn't. I didn't hear anything else. Back at the camp, I threw a few more logs on the fire and kept the flashlight close. I didn't go to bed. I just sat on the log with Lenny at my feet, trying to figure out what I had seen. Could have been a trick of the light. Could have been someone from another camp. But it didn't sit right. Not out here. We hadn't seen anyone for miles. Not a single other car. Around 2 a.m. I heard it again. Shuffling, but closer this time. And then, very faint, the sound of breathing. Human breathing, just on the edge of hearing. It came from the side of the tent where Travis and Andy were sleeping. I stood up slowly, flashlight in hand, and stepped around the fire, keeping low. Lenny stayed by me, his growl still deep in his throat. I got to the side of the tent and listened. Then I saw it, a shape just outside the firelight, kneeling, facing the tent wall, close, almost pressed against it. I couldn't see their face, just the outline of a back and shoulders. They were sniffing the tent, not moving, just slowly dragging their face along the fabric like they were trying to smell the people inside. I took a step forward, and a twig cracked under my foot. The figure bolted, quick, almost too fast. I shouted, not words, just a kind of yell. I chased after the shadow into the woods, flashlight jerking through the trees. I saw glimpses of movement, pale arm, foot, the back of a head. They were barefoot, moving like they knew the woods. I lost them within 30 seconds. When I came back, everyone was awake. I didn't tell them everything, just said I saw someone in the woods, maybe trying to steal something. I didn't want to start a panic. But Susan noticed the footprints in the dirt the next morning. Bare feet, pressed into the soft soil near her tent. She didn't say anything either, just looked at me and nodded. We packed up that morning fast. Stuck with me for a long time. That quiet breathing. The way that person moved, like they'd been watching us for a while. Like they knew the exact moment we'd be off guard. I still don't know what they wanted. Maybe they were just curious. Maybe they were trying to figure out who was in each tent. But I keep thinking about that moment before I saw the shadow. When Lenny brought the ball back, sat down, and didn't wag his tail. I don't think it was because he was tired. I think he knew something was wrong. I still go camping sometimes, but I always bring Lenny, and I never drink that much again. And I never, ever throw the ball past the firelight.